Mailbag. That's the nothing personal word of the day. It's time for our latest mailbag episode. This is an episode where I get to answer your questions. You submitted them to me on Twitter at David P. Samson, Instagram at David P. Samson. Some of you send emails at davidsamsonpodcast.com, where we have all of the shows and all of the merch and our tracking document of all the words of the day. A mailbag gives me an opportunity to talk about subjects that I just can't get to during the course of a regular day-to-day show. And I want to start because there's so many great questions you had. So without further ado, hello, David, Coca, and Sarah. Side note, you were automatically chosen because that's the first time someone had reached out with all three of our names, and we all appreciated that. Hello, David, Coca, and Sarah. At the risk of causing an existential panic attack for myself, you, and other listeners, I have a theoretical question for a future mailbag. I mean, how interesting. You had me at hello. Way into the future, every sport and/or league we know currently will likely cease to exist. The question is, what would happen with all of the stadium deals with cities, counties, and states if a league folded or a sport ceased to exist? I appreciate the show you all produce daily. Well, thank you very much for asking that question, because this came up in the negotiation to get a new stadium in Miami. It comes up in all stadium negotiations or arena negotiations, but we frame it slightly differently. The question is not as existential as you make it to be, which is, what if the world ends? Because our answer to that is there's a force majeure clause, which is a legal clause which says if something super bad happens, like the end of the world as we know it, and none of us feel fine, then we really don't have to worry about you violating the lease that we just signed because you're not playing 81 games in our new building, because there is no baseball, there's no game, there's no world. A force majeure is when something happens that lets you out of your obligations. One of the things that you do when you do a stadium agreement, like what John Fisher will have to do in Oakland, is not Oakland. Darn it, Coca, 4869. One of the things that John Fisher will have to do in his new stadium agreements in Vegas is he will have to promise that every game the Aths play in Vegas will be played in this ballpark. And then there'll be a number of games per year, but there'll be a ability to change that. So, for example, now you have 81 home games in a season. You put a provision in that says you're allowed to play games internationally, 2 every other year, let's say. So there's some years you'll only have 79 games. But what happens if MLB would change its schedule and decrease the number of games? All of a sudden you'd have 154 games, in which case you'd be losing 4 home games. Is that a violation of a lease? The answer in the true sense of the word is no, because we also put a provision in the agreements that says we will play all our home games, contemplated as 81, subject to change by a vote of Major League Baseball. The reason why you can't guarantee something when you do a stadium deal is that you're simply one franchise, and there's 23 votes that can change everything. In baseball, it can be 23-7, and there could be 60 games in a season, like COVID. You'd have to negotiate with the union, et cetera, but you may vote against it, but you may have no choice. So that's not the end of the world, but that's a difference in what you had negotiated. You're asking me what happens if the whole league disappears. In every agreement that's signed, if there is no longer a league, there is no longer a team, and there is no longer an obligation to play in that ballpark. But what gets left behind? What gets left behind is the money that's borrowed by both the owner and by the public entity, the city or the county, to build the ballpark. So John Fisher borrows money to build a stadium in Vegas, his share. If there's no revenue that comes from that stadium, he's got to find another pot of money in order to pay the bank back for what he borrowed. It's like if you borrow money from a bank to live in a house and you get a mortgage, and then your company moves you to a different city. You have an open house that you can't rent. No one's living there. There's no activity at all. Do you still owe your mortgage? Yes, you do. You still have to pay the bank back. For the public, when they raise money to put into a ballpark, they do it through bond offerings, which means they go out to the market, mostly to institutional investors, and they say, would you like to invest in our bonds? We're using these bonds to build a ballpark. And these bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of our county or of our city. So just in case this team is a failure and nobody shows up to games, don't worry, investor. You will still get paid your interest and principal because the county and city will backstop it. It's like being a guarantor on a loan. Side note, don't ever personally guarantee anything that is business related. You can have the business guarantee it or another one of your businesses, but don't ever personally guarantee anything. Thank you. This commercial brought to you by Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, bankruptcy attorneys. So if the league stops and the ballpark is empty, the city and county would have to find other uses for the ballpark, whether it's trade shows or truck shows or concerts or anything to try to raise revenue in order to raise the money to pay back the bondholders or for the owner to pay back the banks. So the answer is stadium deals, meaning the contractual obligation between the team and the public. Those are conditioned on there being a team. And if there's no league, which means there's no team, then the agreement no longer stands. But there are provisions in the agreement that get followed right before the end. So they're like remedies or reliefs. So your contract could state, if Major League Baseball ceases to exist, the undersigned, meaning Marlins LP, agree that they will pay blank to the county. We would not want to agree to a provision like that because if we lose a league and it ceases to exist, the billionaires that you all claim everybody is wouldn't really be billionaires because their teams would be worth zero. So in that sort of meltdown scenario, everybody's a loser. So while you say it's an existential crisis and a panic attack, I would argue that no leagues will fold. NFL, NHL, NBA, MLB. The top four leagues will never, ever fold. And frankly, if they do, we have so many worse problems for you to think about that stadium deals will be way down, like way down on your list. David, hello. I like that start. Thank you. Day one listener and would love a Samson sit down with Billy Corbin. Have we ever done one of those, Coca? I thought we did do a sit down with Billy Corbin once. Maybe not. We have never have. All right, we will. But I digress. Two-part question. Was there ever a player? Oh no. This is what we're going with right out of the chute. All right, here we go. Was there ever a player you wanted to draft but were talked out of it and then regretted not standing your ground? Was there ever a player you drafted who you had no doubt was destined to be a star but shat the bed and fizzled out? Thanks. Well, first, let me talk about Billy Corbin. If you don't follow Billy Corbin, then you don't know that he is one of the top documentarians in the country. The movies that he's made, he is a big-time Miamian. He spends a lot of time doing his civic duty, trying to point out the wrongs and correct the injustices that exist in that community. He and I have a interesting past in that he is very against public financing of any buildings. And he and I were mortal enemies prior to ever meeting each other. He just couldn't stand what I represented, and I just viewed him as an absolute pain in the neck to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And what I wanted to accomplish was saving baseball in South Florida. So it was one of those prime examples where two people have one friend in common, which was Dan Lebitard, but they're never in the same area and no one wants to introduce them. And they just sort of live in different circles until one day those circles intersect. And then you're forced to confront the very reality that, wow, I'm separating art from the artist here. I like him, but I don't agree with him. It's actually a really good lesson. I like Billy Corbin a lot. I don't agree with much of what he says or does, but it doesn't take away the respect I have for him, the appreciation I have for what he does. And I think that if you gave him truth serum, and it would take a lot, he would tell you that he doesn't agree with anything that I say, do, or represent, but that he actually likes me, Sally. He really, really likes me. Let's talk about the draft for a moment here. The draft is so bad in baseball. I'm going to give you names because you asked the question and I want to answer questions. But before I do, I would like to point out that we've got 100 scouts, roughly. Everyone from an area scout, which takes a different area of the country. And then you've got regional scouts. You've got cross-checkers. Those are people who are pretty high up, but hey, I really like this guy. Well, let me go look at this guy and I'll be the judge. Then you have a scouting director. Then you have the head of scouting, the assistant general manager, the president of baseball operations. It's a whole Megillah. The thing about the draft is that these guys are on the road for 280 days a year, staying in the crappiest hotels, padding their expenses, all for the love of the game, truly for the love of the game. It is a hard life to be a scout. And the job they have is to look at someone who's 16 years old. If you're in the Dominican, you're looking at those who are 12 years old, but 16 years old, sophomore in high school, and trying to project what that player will be 10 years from now. And then you put them on a follow list, and then you go back when they're juniors in high school. Then you go back when they're seniors in high school. And you are trying to convince people in your organization that I've looked at Christian Yelich. He's got the sweetest lefty swing. No power yet, but it's going to come. He's going to hit for average. He's going to hit for power. He's going to be a plus defender. His speed is plus plus. His makeup is plus plus plus. His family life is plus 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 plus. We ought to take him. And sometimes it works great. And other times it works terribly. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad scout, but here's what teams do. When the draft doesn't work out, they fire the scouting director. We're gonna try things differently now, a different approach. It's a bunch of horse hockey. There's no science to it. And for the new baseball analytics departments who are listening to this, you can't apply your analytics to the draft. I know that you all say you do. You have an amount of money that a draft pick's worth. You have the amount of money that a win is worth. You look at a kid and you can say, well, we've looked at his spin rate and his velocity, and we will tell you right now, this is a second rounder. Horse hockey. Having eyes on a player, speaking to coaches, speaking to teammates, speaking to family, speaking to the kid, trying to get an understanding of who they are, what they are, will help improve your odds. But guess what? It still will not be dispositive, because you could end up drafting someone and it turns out you did everything right and they end up stinking. If out of your first round, 50% of your first round picks, and I had 18 of them, if 50% get a cup of coffee in the big leagues, you've done well. I'll tell you, Coca, one thing I've never done, and I didn't do it for today either. I did not go through and list every one of the first round picks I was involved with from 2000 to 2017. And it's more than 18 players, because one year, I want to say 05, we may have had 5 first round picks. And we had a terrible draft, actually, that year. which really was not ideal, but it happens. But you can hit at different parts of the draft. And I've told you about Giancarlo Stanton in the second round, or people laugh and joke about Mike Piazza like in the 40th round. If you draft someone in the second round, that means every team passed on him at least once. So if you go back and Google, you can just ask Siri, show me. As a matter of fact, we can do this. I don't see why we can't. Show me the 2003 Major League Baseball draft. Do you think Siri can do it? There it is. The 2003 baseball draft. Are you ready? We're going to do this, Coca. First round. Delman Young was the first overall pick. What do you think of that? Ricky Weeks played in the big leagues. Let's keep going. Kyle Steith. Never heard of him. Tim Stauffer, Chris Lubanski, Ryan Harvey, Nick Markakis, Paul Mahome, John Danks. You've heard of some of these. Ian Stewart, Michael Aubrey, Lastings Millage. You know him. Aaron Hill, Ryan Wagner, Brian Anderson. Not that Brian Anderson. Jeff Allison. Florida Marlins, 16th pick, taken right before David Murphy, who would have been available to us. Chad Cordero would have been available to us. Chad Billingsley would have been available to us. Carlos Quentin would have been available to us. And we went with Jeff Allison. Why did we do that? High school pitcher, number one upside, no worries at all. Turns out he had an addiction issue. We had to fight him to get our bonus money back. There are people within the organization still in touch with him. He's totally turned his life around. But what a terrible 16th pick it was. Didn't pitch an inning for us. Do I regret taking him? Of course not. Would I prefer to take Matt Kemp, who went in the 6th round? You bet your bippy. What about Jonathan Papelbon? He probably would have helped us. 4th rounder, same year. How about my brother from another mother, Ian Kinsler? 17th round. You get where I'm going here? The draft is the single most difficult thing in the entire industry. It's not like the NFL draft. It's not like the Major League Baseball draft. So you want me to choose one? Fine. We had a fight in 2007. It was quite a fight that our baseball people had with our owner, with me. Our owner and some of the baseball people wanted to draft Jason Hayward. You may know that name. But we were told and convinced that we should draft Matt Dominguez. So we did. Matt Dominguez was drafted with the 12th pick of the first round. Played 17 games for us, so that would count in the 50-50. That's a big leaguer. It ain't Jason Hayward. We traded Matt Dominguez on July 4th of 2012. That was the rental when we got Carlos Lee. I will never forget Carlos Lee. We're trying to save the season, that nightmare of a 2012 season. If you go back, Coca, you will find that Carlos Lee's first game was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I guarantee you we were playing the Brewers. I walk into the clubhouse. I say hi to Carlos Lee. I've never seen a bigger guy. He made Prince Fielder look like Kate Moss, who's wearing like the Kardashian Spanx. And I'm not fat shaming him because he was so good and the nicest guy ever. I mean, we had a bunch of great guys. He's not top 10 nicest guys in my career because you got to go through Rondell White and all sorts of other amazing guys. But Carlos Lee is a mensch. We could never get it done. So we lost Matt Dominguez, a first round pick for that rental of Carlos Lee. And also that little bullpen guy, Rob Rasmussen. Anyway, Jason Hayward was right there. We had half the baseball room say take Hayward. Half the room said take Dominguez. He's going to be a top of the lineup guy. Hayward has too many holes in his swing. Turns out that he does, but he still has a major, major career, a really good career. Not Hall of Fame ballot worthy, but he's got a ring. There were so many fights between the baseball department because you were emotional. You're passionate about who you have seen and who you've watched develop and grow up, and you want to have an opportunity for success in the organization. Scouts have so much pride when someone comes into the organization and then performs at the big league level because you've known the kid since they were 17 years old or 18 or 16. It's a really cool thing. I never minded, Coca. It never bothered me when baseball department would fight with each other about who to pick. We'd sit in the draft room and there'd be a list of names on the board and there'd be tons of arguing over what order you should go. And at the end of the day, you make the best decision you can. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But every year, if you're a good front office, there's going to be fighting. So did I want to draft Jason Hayward? Yeah, because I was told by half of the room that he was going to be a big league power bat. Offense, great arm, outfielder. I sort of regret not listening to them. But on the other hand, the 50% of the people who wanted Dominguez, those are the same 50% who wanted Stanton. What about a player who we drafted who we were positive was going to be good? That's an easy one. That was my first draft in Florida. We drafted a kid named Jeremy Hermida. Jeremy Hermida was Yelich before Yelich was Yelich. Jeremy Hermida was going to hit for power. He was going to hit for average. He was also a lefty. He had a plus arm, was going to play right field for us. He made his debut for us. He made the big leagues, so that's a 50-50. He actually hit a grand slam pinch hit in his first ever at-bat, but he just never made it. He never became what we thought he would. And looking back at that draft, we could have had Cole Hamels. Cole Hamels was drafted number 17 the same year we took Hermida at 11. And guess what? Cole Hamels clearly would have been a better pick. And when you look at that draft specifically in 02, and I remember clear as day talking about this after the fact, the Marlins, along with every team in baseball, could have gotten Joey Votto. Or how about Charlie Morton, who went in the 3rd round? Just throwing it out there. Russell Martin in the 17th round. You know the name. John Lester could have had him and didn't. Brian McCann could have had him and didn't. You can't do that to yourself. What I just did, you can't. You won't last in the game. It's sort of, side note here, Coca. It bothers me greatly when people used to come up to me and say, you are the minor league system for the rest of the big leagues. Look at all these great players you have on all these other teams. How could you do that? Marlins fans may still do that with JT and Ozuna and Yelich and Stanton. I get it. But why don't you look at it as though you're a fan of a different team? Say the Guardians, the Royals, the Dodgers, the Yankees. Get it? I'm not talking about payroll. Every team has castaways from another team. Every team loses players who performed for the new team, but not the old team. The reason why you think it's unique to you is because you're a fan of the team that you're a fan of. So you only look at it from your perspective. Here's the baseball example. I would get a call from our owner so many times during a game. God dang it, rang it. Man on 3rd under 2 outs. We got to get that runner in. That's an outrage. How come we can't do it and everybody else can do it? 2 innings later, our pitcher, we're on defense. There's a man on 3rd for the other team and 1 out. And we get out of it. And the owner and everybody else says, way to go. That's how it should always be. Don't let the runner score from first with under 2 outs. But meanwhile, if you don't score from first with under 2 outs and you're on the offense, then you're saying this is outrageous. We should score every time. But when you're pitching, you say, you got to get out of this. Get the strikeout. You can't give up the sacrifice fly there on offense. Just put the ball in the air. The infield's back. Put the ball on the ground. It's just funny to me that everybody looks at their own perspective as though it's the only perspective. Wouldn't it make more sense to actually take a step back and actually understand what it is to be in someone else's shoes, even if you can't fully empathize with it or fully understand it? But in sports, it should be really super easy to know what it is to be on the other side. Because you will have lost, you will have won, you will have gotten a runner in or not gotten a runner in. You will have turned a double play or broken up a double play. You will have hit it with a draft pick or missed it really badly with a draft pick. If you're in the game long enough, you've done it all. You've seen it all. You've been it all. So I appreciate the criticisms, but I must say that they're not unique to me or the Marlins or the Expos or any team. I do appreciate that question, though. Mr. Samson, call me David, please. I love your show and takes. It took me 6 months to come to the conclusion that I do like you, but I listen daily still because it was that informative and insightful. The reason I read that part of the question is A, it's part of the question. B, if you're listening to this, which you are, I'm David. C, I really love that you gave me a chance. This whole show is built on people giving us a chance and giving Nothing Personal a chance, whether it's DraftKings, whether it's Metalark, whether it's CBS, whoever it is, all of you, you've always just given us a chance, and that's all we could ever ask for. Thank you for listening daily. My question, how do our major sports league get it? Let me just say that in a way better way, Coca. 12, 18, 69. My question is, how do our major sports leagues get away with being 501c tax exempt status? It seems like blatant tax fraud and fixable through legislation. These leagues are, quote, not for profit, close quote. Something stinks. In the state of Denmark? No, you didn't say that part. I'd love to hear your take on this. Thanks for the entertainment. Well, thank you very much for that question. 501c3 is what I believe you are referring to, and that refers to a status of being not for profit. Every charity that you are associated with or that you give money to has 501c3 status. That enables you to deduct from your own AGI, adjusted gross income, any amount of charitable donations that you make, as long as those donations were made to an actual charity that has status as a charity. You can't give it to your cousin and say, dude, you're a charity case. Here's $20. Hey, Uncle Sam, I'm deducting $20 from my pay. Is that cool? Nope, not cool. Charity case, not enough. It's got to be a real charity. Where in there, we code words say, not for profit. Do you know that all charities are called not for profit, but they're all operated for profit? Now, the profit can be used to put into endowment. The profit can be used to do more grants. The profit can be used to hire more people, do more marketing, do more advertising. I never really liked the label of not for profit because my view is that everything is for profit. And that if you don't agree with that, it just means that you shouldn't be running the business. There is no such thing as any entity that is done just for fun. You have to support the entity. You can love what you do. You can be making a difference. You can be curing cancer for all I know and for all I'd love. But you got to generate money. And that money that you generate gets offset by expenses to find the cure for cancer or to rent office space for your charity or to buy mailing lists so people can call you with unlisted numbers 14 times a day that you hang up on and feel super badly about and say, please put it in the mail, even though you know that you don't get the mail. And when you do, you rip it up. That got a little personal, didn't it? I tried it. I'm very charitable, actually, as all of you know. I love raising money for charities. I do it all the time, but you can't say yes to everybody. No one can say yes to everybody. It's painful to have to say no to so many. But make no mistake, these entities, all of them, are for profit. But when you get this status, one of the things that comes with it is a level of disclosure. So I'm on the board of a charity called Challenged Athletes Foundation, which is, I hope you're not hearing about this for the first time. It's an incredible organization which supports disabled athletes in their quest to be athletic, in their quest to participate in individual and team sports. When someone loses a leg, we help them get a blade. Someone loses both legs, 2 blades. 4 limbs, a chair. We're always trying to raise money to help athletes. But we have a grant process where we have to say no to half the applicants. You just can't, there's not enough money. Anyway, there's a public disclosure document that actually you can find anywhere online that has the people who work for the organization and how much they get paid. It's all available to the public. There's all these different websites when you give money to the Red Cross or give money, which I hopefully all of you are charitable, and you can see how the charity is run. So for example, there's a bunch of athletes and they start like personal foundations and they get non-exempt status. And then you look and you see that, oh, his cousin's making 250 grand a year and they gave away a total of 10 grand. There's a lot of charities like that. And those are charities you probably don't want to give money to because they're actually not doing anything but finding a way to keep family members on the payroll. And not that I'm against family members on the payroll, but don't hide it under the umbrella of charity. So the leagues did have that nonprofit status for a while. The NFL, MLB, they've all gotten rid of that. They didn't want to disclose publicly what everybody's salary was. They would rather it get leaked to the Associated Press and then written about. I mean, you might as well add the extra step or two. It's always critical to do that. But the purpose for these tax exempt statuses was really for tax avoidance. That may be too harsh for some people to hear, but leagues, like every corporation you know, and it came up a lot during this election, a lot of people wanted you to know that there are companies who aren't paying their share of taxes. Well, for all the amazing people out there running companies, if you happen to run into anyone who owns or operates a cruise company, you may want to ask, why aren't the cruise ships based in the United States? Why are there weird countries associated with every cruise ship? Tax savings. There is an entire huge business of people, and all they do is help companies not pay taxes. You as an individual, if you're a teacher, a fireman, whatever you do for a living, you pay plenty of taxes. And yet in the election, they try to say, we're going to make everyone pay as many taxes as you do because it's not fair. And I agree, it's just not realistic because very, very rich people like billionaires, like an Elon Musk, or take whatever, Bill Gates, take whoever you want. They've got scores of people on staff who are trying to make it so they pay as few dollars in taxes as possible. Then you've got scores of departments and scores of people who are there to make the companies pay as few taxes as possible. It's just sort of the reality of our world. I'm not here to pass judgment, but when you have a rule, then that's your fault because I'm going to do everything I can not to break the rule, but to take advantage of every possible benefit I can have under the constraints of the rule. It's what the Yankees used to say. Here's a funny side story, Coco. The Yankees used to do this, and I never understood it until I was in the game for a little longer. But if you ask George Steinbrenner about all the things they do and they used to do when they were as big bullies as the Dodgers are now, it used to be the big, bad, behemoth, evil empire Yankees. Steinbrenner would always say, listen, I didn't make the rules. I'm one vote out of 30, but you can bet your bippy. That may be where I got that expression from. You can bet your bippy that if I can, under the rules of the CBA and the rules that we have with Major League Baseball and the commissioner's office, if I can find a way to hide money or make extra money or sign this extra player or do something that you can't do because I have more money, then you know what? Good on me. And I love that, actually, because I've always appreciated someone who has ingenuity, someone who has the desire to maximize their profit or maximize their competitive advantage. What's wrong with that? So it used to be for leagues that it made sense that they wanted this status because it was helpful to the leagues and therefore helpful to the owners. At some point, the juice was no longer worth the squeeze, and so these leagues got rid of the tax-exempt status. It's no coincidence that all that coincides with franchise valuations being at a place where all the owners were considered billionaires because there wasn't a lot of sympathy toward them And then when people would find out, oh my God, you're a 501c3, I actually went the other way when I was president of a team. And I would go out of my way to say to people in the media, to get the message to our fans who were upset that we didn't have a higher payroll or not willing to lose more money. I would say, we're not a 501c3. We are for profit. I used to not want you to acknowledge that 501c3s are for profit also, because they're known as not for profit. I'm not even sure that answered your question, but I appreciate that you gave me the time to vent on that issue, because that really was an issue for me. But it's not that anything stinks. I really don't think you should look at it that way. But thank you for the question. Good morning, David. I hope all is well, my fellow insomniac. Side note, I love that. I actually enjoy. I did this thing a couple weeks ago, Coca, where I sent a text with a send later, and I even tweeted about it. I think I tweeted about it like late at night, so no one paid attention to it or was interested in it. But I understand the whole process of not wanting to email people at 2, 3 in the morning, because it makes you feel guilty if you work for someone who's emailing you at 3 in the morning, that you're not answering at 3 in the morning, but yet you don't want to answer at 3 because likely you're sleeping because you're normal. Whereas my view is that if I have something on my mind, that's just how my brain works. When I think of something, I have to do it. That may very well explain my issues. But let's pretend that I can control my impulses, which I can't, and that when I think of an idea, which I often do, and I don't approach someone with it right when it happens, which I don't do all the time, that I won't lose the idea, which I do all the time. So I love when people are emailing me or texting me in the middle of the night, because I have someone to talk to. It's one of the best parts of the relationship I have with Levitard, is we can sit and text at 3 in the morning for 2 or 3 hours. So good morning to you as well. I wanted to ask, with the lowered attendance in places like Camden for the playoffs, do you think it's a sign that fandom is starting to dwindle to the point of concern? And how do you think it should be addressed by teams individually or by MLB as a whole? Love the show and content you provide. It's a true source of entertainment for me. Thank you. No, thank you. I'm really glad you brought this up. The question that you're asking is, does attendance concern baseball? Let's talk about regular season, and then we'll talk about postseason. Attendance is a very PR-based concept. It's a coolness-based concept. When you go to a restaurant and there's no one there, you're thinking the food must stink. When you go to a restaurant and there's a line out the door, you think, this must be a cool place. Sort of the crowd mentality. When you go to a ballpark and you're alone in a section, you're thinking, this is great for a foul ball. But when all you hear is the banging of seats, which haunts my nightmares, that sound at Olympic Stadium. If you know, you know. Est-ce que vous vous souvenez le Stade Olympique? Oi, that sound of the banging seats, it's quite something. But it doesn't really give you the feeling that you're doing something interesting, and it doesn't enable the people who own the product to charge as much as they'd like for you to be a part of the product, because there's a supply-demand issue. There's ways that we can use trickery, which we've done. So you know how there's a first and third base angle? We would put people behind there's sort of the outfield side of the dugout. But if you look at games, I was always very interested in what's the camera seeing. The camera sees when they pan to first base, they see people sitting behind the first baseman. When they show the pitcher, the center field camera, they're showing who's behind the plate. I always liked it to be crowded behind the plate when possible. Then you had the center field camera. You had first, third base. And there's ways that you can price your ballpark in order for people to be in certain sections you want them to be in. It's all part of the puzzle that you put together when you are putting your ballpark together or figuring out your tickets, etc. You price your tickets according to a model, and all that's changed recently when it became dynamic pricing. I'm a fan of 100% dynamic pricing, but it's really hard to build a team with that because you don't know what your revenue is going to be. Therefore, you don't know what your expenses should be. It's why baseball teams are still so caught up on season tickets and why they have all these big drives. Well, you can be a half season ticket holder. You can be a full season ticket holder. We'll give you the 20-game flex plan. Just tell us you'll come to 20 games. Don't even tell us which ones, but make sure you pay us the $600 now. The reason why we don't want to leave it up to individual sales or day of game sales or primary, secondary market day of game sales is that we have no way to calculate whether we should sign that extra pitcher or how deep we can go on our bench. The reality, though, is that the consumer is not interested in season tickets anymore. And while there are places like San Diego where you read there's a waiting list for season tickets, or this is my favorite, we're sold out on season tickets. I love when teams announce that. What does that mean? We used to choose an amount. Yes, we have a 38,000 seat Marlins Park. We're only going to allow 20,000 season ticket holders, full season equivalents, because we want room for group sales. We want room for individual sales. Horse hockey. If you could sell out 38,000 season tickets, you'd sell out 38,000 season tickets. You take the money. Oh no, we've got a big waiting list. We want to make sure we leave seats open. All teams do this, but they do it because it's so cool to have a list. How great is it? The Packers, you got to live to be 272 years old to become a season ticket holder for the Green Bay Packers. I wonder how many season tickets they allow at Lambeau Field. Not quite sure. Camden's a great example. Camden Yards used to be, they'd sell out Camden Yards. When it first opened, it was unreal. You couldn't get a ticket there. Back when payrolls were only in the 30s, but you couldn't get a ticket. Then Baltimore went into a tank, a rebuild, and then you couldn't give a ticket away. But now Baltimore's good again. Why is it that their season ticket base is not high enough and their overall attendance is not high enough that there are pockets of empty seats for any game? The answer is there's too many regular season games. But in the playoffs, it is so scary for Major League Baseball to look at the playoffs this year, and they will announce the success. You've already seen the press releases. You've seen them about ratings. You've seen them about demographics. You've seen all of the time slots they won and all this great stuff on the number of people who went to playoff games. Did you see that one for the World Series? It was the highest attended World Series since 2003. Spoiler alert. The 2003 World Series was the old Yankee Stadium where there's 50,000 people and the old Pro Player where we had 65,000 people for every World Series game. New stadiums have 35 or 40,000. So obviously, you won't draw as much now as you would have back in 03. But this year, it was Dodgers, Yankees, two big stadiums. Arizona, Texas, nope, nothing to do with Arizona, Texas. It's just the size. In any case. So you have all these press releases. You're feeling good about yourself. But then you look at some of the buildings and you say, wow, I'm not sure I understand why there were these empty seats. Well, I've got an answer for you. And should it be addressed? The answer is yes. But I want to clarify something. Individually, it doesn't work that way. For the playoffs, MLB sets the pricing. Now, what MLB will tell you is that individual teams set the pricing, but it's not true. We submit to MLB what we think should be charged, and MLB then tells us what we're charging. They can't deny that because it's totally true. So is it possible that the prices for games are too high? And is it possible that people are viewing the early rounds, like when Baltimore lost this year, as, hey, I've got X number of dollars to spend. I'm going to wait until a later round to spend it. Now, keep in mind, the other thing that's strange about baseball is that when you look at the Los Angeles Lakers, the New York Knicks is my favorite example. Everyone gets all excited about the Knicks, Madison Square Garden. 19,763 people. That's a sold-out garden when I was growing up. When you announce 19,000 at a baseball game, you're laughed out of the building, even when you make up that number. It's terrible. There's 41 home NBA games and 81 home baseball games. Let me get this straight. We have twice as many games and more than twice the capacity. Are we out of our minds? It's absurd. Football, much bigger capacity. 8 games. Get it? So when you go around and try to figure out why there are attendance, quote unquote, issues, the number of people who went to the Camden Yards playoff game, that's more people than would go to a Wizards playoff game. It's under who would go to a Commanders playoff game if they remember how to go to a Commanders playoff game. One of the things that baseball teams are doing now, and we started this back in 2012, is they're building smaller stadiums, which means they won't be able to announce record-breaking attendance for the World Series, but you want as small a stadium as possible. It's cheaper to build, and it's also, it makes more sense. Why would you think that we would be able to draw for a baseball team 3 times what the other leagues draw? I don't quite get the math there. So it's not that baseball is not cool. It just looks not cool. Because when there's a ton of empty seats, oh, the upper deck's closed. What a joke. They closed their upper deck. Yeah, but there's still 20,000 people. It's a sold out Madison Square Garden or American Airlines Arena, which is now the FTX Arena. No, they went out of business. It's now the Kasigaga Arena. The Marlins draw as many people as the Heat do. It just feels worse. So I would say that we need better marketing. They tried, that's $1, with let the kids be kids and let the kids play and let's not be so stuffy. But the truth of the matter is, when it looks like you have a supply-demand problem, there's nothing you can do to have a cool factor. You want people SRO, standing room only. You want it so that people say, I will pay whatever it takes to go see Taylor Swift. Baseball will never have it. It doesn't mean that's a bad thing. We think about how to be cool. Don't we all think about that? I do. Like, what can we do? How do we get more people listening to Nothing Personal? We can have infinity. So anything short of infinity means we're doing something wrong. Anyone who's doing something at 8 a.m. every single day that's not with me, that means that's someone who I have not gotten. That's not ideal. One of the things that you try is different ways to reach different people. In baseball, we're always trying new rules. You're trying different bobbleheads, giveaways. You're always trying something. You've been watching what's going on with the Savannah Bananas, haven't you? That's that cool baseball team in yellow that's selling out baseball stadiums because they come for one game and they're funny, like a foul ball. If it's caught by a fan, it's an out. I love that rule, by the way. And they just don't take themselves too seriously. You can sell out a ballpark for a special event. Savannah Bananas, Joel Osteen, Guns N' Roses, Taylor Swift. You can do all sorts of things once. But 81 times, that's what makes it difficult. Frequency. Too much of a good thing means you don't get to enjoy its greatness. That is why anytime that you can take something and hold it back, when you get it going again, it feels twice as good. Well, I appreciate the fact that you're with me for a mailbag episode. We'll do another one, I promise you. And remember, find me at davidsamsonpodcast.com or on X at David P. Samson. DMs are open. Keep coming with questions. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your loyalty. And Coca, Sarah, and I will keep doing what we do. Keep those questions coming. Remember, it's just business. This is nothing personal.